Welcome to another episode of Sneaks, Rhymes, and Life. I am your host, Lionel McDonald. So we're going to get into an episode a long overdue that I've wanted to do, since the beginning of this year, and I kind of really realize as I now think back to 30 years ago when I was in college, and this album really probably impacted me more than any other album of my college career. And it's 30 years ago. I did a series of, um, you know, tribute or props to albums from 1993, which was 30 years ago, 2 years ago, as we were going to the 50th anniversary of hip hop. Did a one show take with my boy David, otherwise known as the Whack Curator, on 30 years of 94 albums last year. And that was a lot of fun. I don't know if it's going to be a series, but 1995 was a very important year in hip hop, as some of the greatest albums we know of all time came out in 95. But one album more so impacted me just based on where I was in life, and it's Dah Shinin. I have the CD here, travel with it today. Actually, I'm in Atlanta for a work trip, but definitely wanted to take some time, and I just need the space and the mindset, and today is the day that we're going to talk about this. So again, this is going to be available on Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Plus, this will be on YouTube. So you'll see me in my hotel room, but we got to talk about this incredibly impactful album to me, but also the culture of hip hop in the 90s. And that is Smif and Wesson's debut album called Dah Shinin. So as I kind of get into it, this album here, done by the group Smif and Wessun, it's called Dah Shinin. It's their debut album, came out January 10th in 1995. I literally was in my second day, I believe. Second day, or maybe it was the second day of my time in college. And I had just gone to first year university. University was not for me. Took some time to make some money. Decided I was going to go pursue business in college. Didn't like where I was at life. I was still trying to figure things out. Wanted this job at this place called Foot Locker, which kind of worked out for me eventually, but I was not in a good space mentally. And I got this CD. Also, I got another CD, which kind of was the B-side, if you want to call it. And we'll talk about B-sides in a second, because this group probably did B-sides better than any other group in the history of hip-hop. But I truly listened to this album on a Tuesday, and I rode this album for an entire semester. So one album, you played 5 days a week, plus on the weekend. And where it put me mentally, where the sound sonically, it's so unique. Like to a certain extent, it's actually recorded quiet in comparison to hear some of the other albums that are from the same era. But Dah Shinin was, for me, a godsend. It was an album that truly impacted me and made me feel a way that got me through one of the most challenging times in my entire life. So for those that don't know Smif and Wessun, we're going to roll it back. Who are these guys? Tech and Steel. We ain't going to get into no government names today, but they are from Brooklyn, Bedford-Stuyvesant, and Brownsville, Brooklyn. So these two MCs combine to be what's called Smif and Wessun. Now, there was a piece after this album, their debut album, which is a masterpiece. they got sued by the gun company Smith and Wesson, and ultimately that led to a name change. Ultimately, then down the road, as we get to album 5 or 6, we readopt the name Smith and Wesson. We keep it moving. But Tech and Steel, and one day I would love to actually talk to these guys for some time, have them on the podcast, because they were such instrumental figures in as what I was going through in college. And these two MCs didn't sound like anyone else. And hey, we had some great duos of that era. We had Mobb Deep, who was just about to come out 4 months later. With their sophomore album, which truly helped also change the game and make us feel differently about music from Queens, along with what happened with Nas the year before. Like, Queens was just got on a run and changed things. But this group, Smif and Wesson, from Brooklyn, New York, was part of a collective called the Boot Camp Clik. They debuted way back a couple years prior on Enter the Stage, which is Black Moon's album. So 5-footer, obviously we had Beat Miner still producing. He produced both albums. And then it was led by Buckshot, otherwise known as Buckshot Shorty. So an incredible project. They were on the song Black Smith and Wesson. Then they also did end up doing this remix with Mary J. Blige, and they took off. People knew who they were. People then really started to clamor for this group. And I think as we started to hear the things that they created, first single in 94 is where the buzz started. So first one was Bucktown. And one unique thing about the Boot Camp Clik, particularly Smif and Wesson and Black Moon, they did remixes better than anybody else in the game, including Bad Boy, including anything from the West Coast. They did a Bucktown, and then the B-side was Let's Get It On, which is arguably one of their best songs they've ever made. It was a B-side. This thing debuted top in the US, I think, Rap 100. It debuted at 14. So there was street buzz. The DJs were playing it. It was on the radio. In college radio really adapted to this song. So that was the first single. Then Recognize was the second single that they released, but their most recognizable song was the B-side, and that was Soundboy Burial. And that is the song that literally closes every single concert of recent memory. And I've seen them once in Vancouver, twice in Toronto, most recently last year, and then I will see them on 420 when they're here with Capadonna and Styles P in Toronto. And I say here, normally I record in Toronto, but I'm in Atlanta right now, but you feel what I'm saying. So that was the B-side to one of the track or the albums that they had come out with. And then One Time was the third, and I love One Time. One Time is maybe the most underrated song that Smif and Wesson has ever made. An all-time classic in my library of music. And then the B-side was Stand Strong. So One Time, the third single, is absolutely incredible. Then, beyond the album, One on One, Bucktown USA, these are other charted singles that they had over time. They've done some great collaborations with Wu-Tang, most notably Raekwon. But if we talk about The Shining makes you think about so many different things, and through motivation to their stance on Soundboy and what the Soundman and how he affects the show. Essentially, that's where this comes from. Home Sweet Home, the love of their neighborhood, and I think that the song translates to so many people in so many places to love where you're from. Whether you're from Brooklyn or you're from Queens or you're from Staten Island, you're from Uptown, whether you're from the Bronx or you're from Dallas, Texas, or Atlanta, Georgia, or Los Angeles, California, or Toronto, Ontario, or Vancouver, or Paris, France, or London, England, you name it, you feel a sense of pride when you listen to this song, Home Sweet Home. And the production, like, honestly, Beat Miners, this, I would say it's the best project they ever produce. And I want to tell you that it's, plus the intro, it's 16 tracks, all elite top level production. We only got a snippet of the talent that these guys had in the song that they did, Smif and Wessun, on Into the Stage, to really now hear them on Soundboy Burial. And one of the unique things is, in the 90s, as you were bringing on potentially the next group or the next come up, they debuted on a song. So, hey, native tongues, they did certain things. We had De La, but then we had Tribe on a track called Buddy. We've had just countless other pieces. So no different, Hit Squad, they ultimately put that was led by EPMD, but we had DOS Effects, and we had Keith Murray, and obviously we had Redman. This is how you introed people. So this was the Black Moon contingent of Buckshot, the 5-footer, and then obviously Beat Miners. They started with Into the Stage. We then got none other than the group in question, which is Smif and Wessun on the track. When Smif and Wessun does their album, they had Serang Wonder, which is from OGC, which is part of the camp. And then, you kind of continue to build on featuring an additional artist as part of the Clik. Ultimately we got Fab Five and we got Helter Skelter, and that's the Clik. And there's been other people that have been on and off Duck Down Records. I actually got Duck Down t-shirt, which I've worn many times. Actually, there's a picture of me from a Vancouver club when I saw Smif and Wessun for like the second time. And again, an incredible show, but cohesiveness. This is my favorite. One of my top 3 albums from '93. And yes, there were some amazing albums from '93. I think in the same conversation is Only Built for Human Links and The Infamous. Yes, I know that there's other amazing albums, including Jizz's album Liquid Swords. I would take Smif and Wesson's Dah Shinin over that specific album. And that's just me. This is my opinion. It's my show. Again, Spotify, Google, Apple, also on YouTube, you're going to be able to find and listen to this and recap this. And again, we're coming off an amazing year in '94 with Nas and Jeru and obviously Biggie and Craig Mack and Artifacts. All these guys came out. So after the great run of '93, where we got Soulja Mischief, we got Snoop, we got so many amazing albums, including Enter the Wu-Tang, and we got Tribe's album, plus we got a De La's album. It was an amazing year. So we're on a run, and this album truly set the standard of how great 1995 was going to be. So when we look at the impact of this album, it really resonates with me. It resonates with so many people. This was the epitome of grimy, gritty New York City hip hop at its very, very best. We're talking about Tim's. We're talking about wearing bandanas. We're talking about so many different things. The aesthetic, I can't say gritty and grimy enough when I think about this album, but it gave you such a feeling of empowerment, Black empowerment specifically. And these two Black creatives, powered by the musical backdrop that was created by Beat Miners, create one of the greatest albums of the 90s, in my opinion, and specifically in 1995. This album really takes me back to 1995. And it's amazing that this album is 30 years old. So like I'm dating myself because I was in college 30 years ago, and this album was the album for me. It makes me feel such a way. It makes me feel that this album truly could take you to a place that you may never have gone. And hey, they've done, the Tiny Desk concert they did about, how long ago was that? It was like 2017, 2018, I think. So we're coming up on like 7 years of that. But they've done Soundboy. They've done so many projects. They partner with my second favorite project that these guys have ever done is Monumental with Pete Rock. Pete Rock, again, the sonic sound, but like lyrically sharp, but also a level of introspectiveness, a level of New York City griminess at its fullest. But I think the partnership and the dynamic between the two MCs is one that's not talked about nearly enough in the game of hip hop. We talk about EPMD, we talk about Fife and Q-Tip, we talk about Mobb Deep, we talk about so many other artists that have collaborated and worked together, and as their duo. But we don't talk about Tech and Steel as being one of the greatest that we've ever seen. We talk about Nice and Smooth. We talk about so many other ones, but we don't talk about how great Tech and Steel are. So yeah, Dah Shinin is an incredible project. If you haven't listened to it, please go out, take a second, download this thing, run it back. Now, hey, they do have a new product. It only came out late February. It was February 21st. Infinity, they got some great guest shots on it. So Smif and Wessun has been doing this for 30 years. An instrumental part of New York City, Brooklyn, hip hop. And it's a group that you should definitely just take some time and to listen. Rhyme skills, the chemistry between the two is outside the handful. Like they were in the upper echelon. And when I talk upper echelon, you think of Q-Tip and Fife. You think of Nice and Smooth. You think of Parrish Smith and Eric Sermon. And I would tell you that Tech and Steel are like right there. They're right there along with obviously the dynamic duo that is MOP. And the way they work in and out is like they took elements from other MCs and how they performed, and they literally finish each other's sentences, which is pretty cool. But as two individuals that have done music on their own, specifically General Steel, but also then can find their way to continue to come back to one another and really just define what New York City, Brooklyn hip hop is. It is an album that you should absolutely listen to. I think if I give you my top 5 songs, I tell you it's One Time, Keep It Moving, and I like the remix of Bucktown. Soundboy Burial is definitely on there. And then I would tell you Let's Get It On and Home Sweet Home. So Bucktown remix would be the honorable mention, but again, I'll say One Time, Soundboy Burial, Keep It Moving, Home Sweet Home, and Let's Get It On. Those would be my top 5. But again, they've like the formula that Duck Down Entertainment and Duck Down Records, specifically the Boot Camp Clik, and how they flip a remix. Like I Got You Open remix is arguably the greatest remix that we've ever heard. And yeah, people want to say flavor in here. I'm going to tell you, as an original song with no adding additional MCs, I Got You Open is probably the best remix we've ever heard. And from Bucktown remix, and then the B-sides, like they had their own formula that was just different than everybody else's. And it is absolutely second to none and truly elite. I had this album when I was going through a very dark time, when I truly doubted myself, And there were pieces of this album, as they said, KIM, kept me moving, keep it moving, kept moving forward, proud of where I was from, and just an energy and an aura. Like this album to me, like it's like this orange haze that's above this album. Like I still need to find this on vinyl to complete my vinyl wall. It's got to go on the wall and I got to hang it. But 30 years of Dah Shinin, this album is one of the great albums in the history of hip hop and arguably one of the most underrated. But Tech, Steel, if you're watching on YouTube, there is your salute. You're two of the greatest. We appreciate you. I appreciate you. This is Sneaks, Rhymes, and Life. Lionel McDonald signing off. We out.